Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Instrumental Breakthroughs podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Shankin of Tam Integration. Tam Integration is a project that offers psychedelic integration and preparation support all over the world. We are co-produced by Deadhead Land, so thank you, Brian. And also thank you to Livestream Remote, who's offering technical support. I'm very happy to welcome our guest, who I think I first saw on Last Comic Standing a bunch of years ago, and we've reconnected recently because he's been kind enough to present at this year's upcoming Psilocybin Summit, which I hope that a lot of you can make it. Psilocybin Summit is 4 days of celebrating the science, culture, myth, and magic of the sacred mushroom. And I believe on Saturday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, we will get to again meet our guest. Thanks for being here, Mike Kaplan. Appreciate it.
Happy to be met at this time and that time and as many of the all times as possible. Thanks for having me on this show. I like that even in the first few moments of the podcast, you integrated instrumentally the words integration and instrumental. You're like, welcome to instrumental integrate. It's a bunch of words and concepts. Here we are.
Thank you for pointing out that I don't know what I'm talking about. I really appreciate that. So, as you know, the point of the show is to talk about how psychedelics and creativity intersect. And it is my sense that, this beautiful, creative, miraculous being that we are witnessing before us has had some psychedelic experiences that helped form him into this being that we are seeing, that we have seen in the past, we're seeing now, and we're going to see in the future.
Well, I can make no promises about the future, but I can tell you about the past and the present, I think.
Well, why don't you give it a shot? Why don't you tell us about,
Sure.
some of your breakthroughs?
What if I was like, so we're here to discuss the relationship between psychedelics and creativity, and I'm like, they are completely distinct. But
great, change my mind.
So I grew up I didn't take any, I guess, for simplicity's sake, what we might call mind-altering substances until my 20s, when a woman who I married and then stopped being married to, but before that happened, introduced me to marijuana, which I'd heard about, didn't love, didn't want to do, did start doing, did stop. I kind of mostly don't, but I was like, all right, I guess drugs do that. And then she and I were actually both musicians, and we were performing when I was around 25 on Block Island, which is an island off the coast of Rhode Island, at a festival called the Block Island Music Festival.
Aptly named.
Oh yeah, it made a lot of sense. You knew what you were getting. And so I was at the time shifting from being, I was aspiring singer-songwriter, and at that time I was also becoming I was aspiring for all kinds of things. Now I'm I'll try not to spiral out of control on this, but I was becoming a comedian as well at that time, and I had started with some songs that were funny, and some songs that probably weren't, that either were or weren't supposed to. But so I was mostly at this point pursuing comedy gigs, but this was just sort of a leftover, like, hey, you're a musician. Do you want to perform on? I was like, yes, I'll perform anywhere, doing anything. So it was a really cool, weird, like, the island is like, I think you could walk around the whole thing. Like, I think there were vehicles on it, but you couldn't bring a vehicle to it, maybe, or it was hard to there was no like bridges to get to it. You had to get there on a boat. And it was just this cool little community that maybe it seems like their economy was like, please come during the summer, during our festivals. Like, very little happens the rest of the year, is my impression. And and so I performed, and then I sold some CDs that I had, which were of music that I'd written and performed. Actually, I had an open mic in the Boston area at a place called Club Passim, and so the album was called Open Mic Night, with Mike spelled the way that I do. This CD is no longer available unless you're in my mother's basement, but even those I think she got rid of. And I, after the show, was selling a CD, and a guy gave me a $10 bill, and it was wrapped around a mushroom. And I was like, "Oh, this is." And are there more of these? I think my wife had never done it, or my then wife, or then almost wife, but she was interested, and so I was like, "Okay, I will." I have the data point of marijuana, not my favorite. I'll take another data point of a different mind-altering substance, and we bought some more mushrooms from the guy who had given me one, and ate them, and it was the first time that I experienced I guess the kind of, it's I don't know if you ever have hard time putting into words this, but it was like,
That's why this is so fun.
a kind of connectedness. Like I had just read the book Ishmael. Do you know that book by Daniel Quinn? It's about like a
The
telepathic
monkey.
gorilla. Yeah,
Yeah.
that through the Socratic method teaches a human about, I think all of human history from the 10,000 years ago agricultural revolution.
Right. That's what my takeaway, I think, was that agriculture and monogamy were bad. Or
And
maybe that
here,
was Chris Ryan.
huh? Though, yeah. I mean, well, they're all kind of, yeah. All people are kind of the same person. So, and gorillas as well. But
Hmm.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I read more of Daniel Quinn's things, and it wasn't that agriculture was bad so people, I think he would address critics who are like, so what are we supposed to do? Just stop having civilization, stop having society, like get rid of farming. And his point was, I think he was just pointing out like what did, sort of being descriptive rather than prescriptive about, here is what happened and like what can we do now? And he was big on, I read another book of his about like sort of finding your tribe, I guess, which is a thing that maybe we need do today in a way that you didn't have to do in the past because you had your tribe, because you were born into literally your tribe. But
Hmm.
he talks of like people running away to join the circus, and the circus would be a tribe, and like the whole point of the circus was that the circus perpetuates itself. And it seems like the psychedelic community is a kind of circus as well, that you don't have to actually like literally run away to. You can in some ways just figuratively, emotionally, spiritually, not even run, just stop running, sit. And so all of it, I feel like that book, and around this age, I guess 25 is the age that I understand has been posited as like, that's when your brain, quote unquote, is an adult. Like up until that point, it's still like, your teenage years, you're like, it's firing all over the place and like hormones and chemicals. And then you're like, okay, but 18, that's adult, 21, that's adult, but 20. And it's weird because uh, 25, like obviously our brains and bodies and all matter is always shifting, and there's never like there's a bunch of arbitrary places where we're like, okay, we're done. But so I can't, it's funny because I don't have any other entry point into psychedelics other than when I was 25. If only I could, have maybe an alternate version, if I had an alternate reality where I could turn 25 and also not do mushrooms at that point, and do mushrooms like try one earlier, try one later, and be like, which one did what? Because like the book Ishmael had opened my mind a little bit as well. I was like, oh wow, like but is it the information in the book? Is it me being open to learning things and, being like, oh wow, this is stuff I didn't know about the world? And but, hopefully every child learns that the things they learned as children aren't all exactly the correct scientific empirical, because there's new empirical data being found and sifted all the time in the outside world / the inside world, and which are the same. So I I ate these mushrooms, and I remember just, some of it's tactile. Some of it's just like, a feeling in the body, like, the creeping up through the brain and then being like, oh, like I get it. And like, it's weird. Usually it needs an antecedent, but I was like, I get it. Like, whatever it is, like, there was a connection to, like, I'd been raised with, cultural Judaism. Like, I'd been bar mitzvahed. My parents weren't like, there's a we didn't really talk about God specifically in my family. I think that my parents both have a belief in something, perhaps the it that I'm talking about, but it was never explicitly stated. And uh, I I then, like, I think in college I became an atheist and was like, I mean, well, because the God that I'd heard about in the books and was like, I was like, didn't seem to match up to, like, well, why is there so much, why I mean, even the book says, like, so much suffering, like, if there's an all powerful, all knowing, all present God. I think I just learned, I'm studying some things about Buddhism with a friend who is a practicing Buddhist, and he told me that the Buddha, in at least one brand, one genre, his understanding of the Buddha is that the Buddha is omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, but not omnipotent. Which, because if the Buddha was omnipotent, then there'd be no suffering. But all the other things, he's like, yep, he knows everything, but and is like, wants everyone else we all have the capacity to move along that path. And so,
Well, you remind me of something I read in the Principia Discordia.
okay,
Do you know this book?
I've heard of it. I
It's,
haven't read it.
it's the sacred text of the Discordians who worship Eris, the goddess of discord. And these two practitioners, perhaps on some sort of substance, perhaps just on their own effort and grace, conjured the goddess up, and she appears, and I believe she has a monkey on a leash, and she smells like jasmine or whatever, the whole goddess thing. And they say, why is there such inhumanity to man? Why is there so much suffering and trouble and trauma? And she says, oh, that's easy, it's because you like it. And they say that's ridiculous, it's absurd to say that we like it. And she said, okay, cool, then stop. And they were enlightened.
That's beautiful. Yeah, this Buddhist, this text on Tibetan debate, which is this course that I'm taking with my friend, has within it. I mean, this is perhaps like the most basic Buddhist thing. The idea that, like, every being, every being that's alive, like, wants to, like, at the deepest level, we want to increase joy and decrease suffering, and that
Yes.
everything that we do is motivated by those desires, though we are not the best at knowing what the things are that will increase joy and decrease suffering. Uh, and so I like that in the book. It's I think the author's name is Daniel Perdue. He says, it's like, why did the chicken cross the road? Because it was trying to increase joy and decrease suffering. And so if you'd like, I'm happy to try to I'll try to continue to start answering your question, which is like my initial
What
sort
happened
of
when you ate mushrooms on Block Island?
yes. And so I feel like
I'm
that
in
was
no hurry, by the way, you take your
oh,
time.
I appreciate it.
Just walk
Um,
us all the way around the island.
oh, beautiful, beautiful. Uh, so my first psychedelic mushroom experience was like just this beautiful, like, presence. It was. I remember going to like an after party after our shows, and it was actually, it's funny. I guess I never thought about the fact that it was like it's a during party because it's during the party, but it's after. It's like the after party also doesn't have an antecedent to what the thing is that it's talking about being after. Okay, so I'm there and I remember this guy named Bill, and he was just like a guy who lived on the island and was like helping out at the festival. And I just remember like looking at him and talking to him, And I think telling him that I was on mushrooms for the first time, and he was like, "Oh, cool." And I was just like, "Oh man, like this guy, he's just like he's a guy, and he's an animal. Like we're all animals, and we're all, like perhaps, beginner, like tripping 101 kind of insights into like, oh, like the sameness of us all. That we're all different." In different places at different times, made of different things, but also all made of the same thing. And so I would eventually come to, so I feel like I was there I was on that island because of creativity. So in a way, my first story is about how creativity led to mushrooms, not how
Mhm.
mushrooms led to creativity. But eventually it became sort of like, a yin yang process that I remember one time, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, I was performing in Winnipeg, Canada, smoothie capital, or slushy. They make something there that they claim to be
A
the
frosty beverage, some kind of
yeah.
frosty beverage.
They're the centrality of it, and they're also I learned this the geographical center of North America is in Winnipeg, Canada.
Interesting.
Um,
Because I was
yeah.
just in Lawrence, Kansas, which is the geographical center of America
Oh, sure.
and has a lovely co-op.
Ah, what beautiful.
Yeah.
uh, so I remember I was in. I was talking with some comedians, and one of them had a connection to some mushrooms, and I got some mushrooms, and so I did them one of the days. I was in Winnipeg for I think maybe a week or possibly almost 2 weeks performing, and what there was I did everything that I could find to do in Winnipeg that I wanted to do in a few days, and then I found these mushrooms and did them and spent a day uh, just writing songs and recording songs into like this very microphone that I'm using right now, the Zoom recorder that I have. And I think that, I mean, the if somebody asked me like, how do you be creative? Like where does creativity come from? Like period, like without respect to psychedelics. I mean, like we as humans have had it at least in my lifetime and in the lifetimes that I know about. There's you start your childhood and then you're drawing, you're painting, you're with your fingers, you're dancing, you're singing, you're manifesting some kind of like artistic creative energy. Like it's like, oh, like it's just a classic thing for children to do, whether in a class, whether at home. And there's an author named Linda Barry who I like a lot. And oh,
She draws
yes,
sort of it's this sort of angsty, freckly woman.
yes,
Yeah,
that's
she's brilliant.
oh yeah, she's got a book called Syllabus. Like she's a teacher of like art and drawing and comic books and writing uh and just in general creating. And so her graphic novel called Syllabus is like can be read just like as a wow, like it could be a manual for doing it. It could be just like it's funny, I'm thinking now my Buddhist friend Gus has just told me like that, you can read if you read a cookbook that you don't get food, you can read all about the medicine, but if you don't take it, then you don't get better. So I'm like,
Well, like it's a lot different, but like counting to 10 or thinking the number 10 is a lot different than taking 10 breaths.
oh, that's great too. Yeah, that's
From like a meditation, I'm just thinking Buddhist meditation kind of thing. It's like, thinking about like, oh, right, like meditation is cool.
for sure.
It's different than meditating.
Yes. So yeah, 100%. And then also, I remember I like that reminds me of this Ram Dass quote, this Ram Dass paraphrase, that like the reason we meditate is not to become the best meditator, but certainly you start from it's so I there's so many like sort of, do you know chop wood carry water, like the Zen koan, the before enlightenment chop wood carry water, after enlightenment chop wood carry water. that like as a child we come out creative. We come out kind of tapped into the creative energy. Like all possibilities exist. If somebody hands you a pen or a pencil, you start drawing. If somebody like teaches you to sing or like shows you what singing is, you start singing. And then so the Linda Barry quote that I like a lot is she asks in one of her books, how old do you have to be, or how old does a child have to be to make a bad drawing? And I mean, it's like a Zen koan. I love it so much. I think about it all the time. And at a certain point, we do become either self-critical or take in the critiques of society, of our families, of the world around us.
Mhm.
Like I'm very grateful that my family was very encouraging, so much to the point that when I started doing comedy, I feel like audiences were like, why are you doing this? And I was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I love me.
My
uh
mom says I'm really funny.
yeah, my grandmother, like I trust her. She knows me better than you do, and I trust her. So uh but for sure, I knew that, it took work to get good at something, but I also didn't know where I was starting from objectively, because is there even an objective place to get started? But I did stop drawing like maybe when I was like 9 or 10 or 11 or 12. Like it started feeling more like work, more like a job. And I was like, I'm not getting better. So I stopped, but I probably didn't get better because I stopped. And and so the question of like where does creativity come from? It comes from starting and continuing. And so
Mhm.
whether that's what we're doing when we're children, like whether it's starting or continuing, depending on what you believe about past lives, or so definitely like creativity comes from starting and or continuing. And the I went to this summer camp called Bucks Rock, which was founded by a man who studied with Maria Montessori, and the principle was you do whatever activities you want all day. There's no schedule. Like you have these between 9 and 12 and 2 and 6. The shops are open. You can draw, you can paint, you can act, you can glass blow, you can weave, you can do batik, you can record music. And I I feel like that they were focused on the process more than the product. Like, it was nice to at the end of the summer if your parents are like, what did you bring home? What did you make? And you're like, I mean, ultimately, that place was the place that I went through the process of becoming me becoming like a myself, a person who understood that there were other like creative, like artsy, weirdo, misfit, outcast kids like who might not have had the best time during their high school years during the year, but lived for this summer camp magical experience. It was running away to join the circus. This camp, like at least you had circus once a year, and it was so valuable and important that like so I'm so grateful that I got, these creative environments like and creative messagings. Like my parents were both music teachers, so they were like music was so important to my mom specifically, like to get me to play the violin when I was 4, and then and I hated it. And I hated having to do it. It was an obligation. And and I had it was even though the camp was like you're supposed to do whatever you want. My mom was like, and what you want to do is play violin in the orchestra. But then I also did discover the guitar. Like a friend of mine had a guitar and I just picked it up and started playing it. I'm like, ooh, I don't have to do this. I get to do this. And I taught myself guitar, and that is what led me to, I was like, oh, this is, I, it was the sort of, the antecedent of the violin, the prerequisite class of like all the music theory that I'd taken, all the finger dexterity, all the calluses that like laid the groundwork for like the beautiful, this quote from the prophet, the greater that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. And so the yes.
I don't know that one, but it reminds me, I believe, of a Rumi quote that
Mm.
says, don't surrender your loneliness so quickly. Let it marinate and soften you so that you're something, so anyway, at the end of the poem, it's all about love. So you love yourself and you love others. That the loneliness will marinate you and make you soft and beautiful and kind.
I love it. Yeah, so I I became a person who now felt like fully like I was like I love making music. I'm now, a teenager
Hmm.
and getting into college, and that became like my goal, my sort of reach goal. The At the time I was like, oh, applying to colleges was a thing that was happening. You have your safety school, your reaches, and like your hopefully you're more sure, like I think I can get into this one for sure. And so my reach goal of life became like I don't know if I can do it, but a traveling musical performer, a singer songwriter who made albums and had fans. And I was like, I don't know if I can do it, but I know that in order to try to do it, I am writing songs and I am playing them in public as much as possible. Uh, which led me to doing comedy, which led me to Block Island, which led me to mushrooms. And so getting back to Winnipeg, now I'm a person in my at that point in my 30s who has appreciated uh, like I feel like psilocybin has like offered so many like different avenues of experience. Like sometimes it is like that first one, or like a time if I'm just sort of if I'm alone, or if I'm with a contemplative friend, contemplative.
Hmm.
If I'm with a friend who thinks or reflects, uh, and we sit sometimes quietly or talking in a park or in at the beach or in whatever nature area, or just with our eyes closed in a building. Uh, and it feels, there, it's such a, I know the word spiritual, like, so I went from, uh, experience, like being like, it doesn't make, like the gods I've heard about don't make sense. And to experiencing like, oh, like what if you can define God, and you can define anything the way that you want to. Like nobody can tell you that you can't define things the way you want to, unless somebody else told you that you can't. And I say that you can. So if you listen to other people, listen to me. And I'm telling you to listen to yourself. So uh,
Very Ramana Maharshi. I like it.
thank you. Uh, I so I'm in Winnipeg, and I'm like, I think a fun thing to do would be I did mushrooms and I walked around, and then I came and I actually got to go into a sensory deprivation tank,
Mm.
uh, while a float tank, like with the mushrooms. And I think I did them a lot one day and a little bit the next day, or maybe the same amount each day, but the experience was big and then kind of a major and a minor in doing mushrooms in Winnipeg. And I went back to my room where I was staying, and I had my podcast recording equipment, and I just started recording the things that I was just like, there's music here, there's songs here, there's ideas, and I just started making them. I made like one song called "Make Something." I made another song about Jesus called about I think basically the only lyrics in it are Jesus Christ and something nice, and I wrote one song about just about it was called Flow State, and I was just trying to capture the idea of what it's like when we get glimpses of being in or understanding that there is a potential flow state to be gleaned and present with, which is some of my comedy is self-referential. Like some of my comedy is about my comedy. And these were like songs about the kinds of songs that they were. Like a song I was making something that was a song called Make Something. I was, trying to being like, I think, like whenever I'm meditating or whenever I'm on psychedelics, I feel like the great one great conflict that arises is like, do I continue to try and ride this wave as far as I can, or if uh, every once in a while, if I have an insight, I'm like, ooh, do I stop? Do I stop the wave to hold on, wave? Can I get off for a sec, jot something down so that future me can know something about the now? Like, I think future, like, and it's like, so I eventually would come to do ayahuasca ceremonies starting in
I,
my early to mid 30s.
I have a few questions about what you just said.
Sure, of course.
One, I'm curious about, and you can answer either one or neither, or both, I guess. They would be your options.
Nope,
Um,
either one or neither.
um, I'm curious what you like about self-referential comedy and music. Like, why is that compelling? I'm also curious, it sounds like there's a lack of trust. It sounds like you feel like if you get off the wave, if you don't get off the wave to jot down the insight, then it'll be gone.
Uh, yeah, I hear that. I mean, so I will answer your question, and I will start answering it by continuing telling you about this one ayahuasca experience I had where I went into
Perfect.
it. I've done a number of them with one guide, and the guide. One time, somebody asked the guide, like, "Do you recommend writing things down during the experience?" And at that point, I was sometimes writing things down during the experience, and that was a thing that I didn't even know you could do when I first started doing it until I saw somebody else doing it. I'm like, "Oh, great!" And the guide said, "I don't recommend writing things down during the experience because you will remember the important things." Uh, and that struck me. And still, every once in a while, I create like the equivalent of maybe like verbal memory palaces in my head to be like, okay, I thought of this thing and I smiled. Now, whenever I smile, I'll think of this thing. Or I remember like initials of ideas and be like, because as a comedian, I write down or capture with my voice in a digital recorder so many things
Right.
like that could be ideas. And I'm only now like 18 years into comedy, continuing to understand that if I don't write everything down, I'm not going to run out of things. Like I might not remember the one thing that I put into my recorder 3 months ago. Like if I lost a notebook or lost a recorder, I might not recover it all, but the big things will be there. And so to your point, and to your point about exiting the wave to write it down, like it sort of works in both directions. Like I no longer specifically need to like write everything down, but there are some things that still probably I'm like, this one feels like a good one. This one feels like a big. This one feels like I'm willing to sacrifice my moment, my nowness right now because I want to get this down. Um, there's to answer your question about self-referential art, comedy, music, and otherwise.
Can I
Like,
comment on that first one first?
please, of course.
Um, I hearing you say that, what I'm realizing is that I actually write things down the opposite. I sort of use writing down as like a bucket for things that won't leave my head.
Ha.
So what I find is that I will sometimes get a thought or an insight or an idea and I can't get it to go away. But if I write it down, then my mind feels like, okay, safe, you got it. And now you can get back on the wave. So I actually have the thoughts pull me out of the wave. I put them on paper so I can get back on.
That's really something. It, in some ways, I think that if we zoom out far enough, maybe we're doing the same thing
Okay.
because for the maybe it's just a matter of frequency or how, how repetitive it is because I'll have perhaps like let's say if I didn't write something down, then it might continue. It
Right.
might pop up again. Uh Perhaps immediately, perhaps, an hour later, perhaps a day later. But like there's certainly things every once in a while that when I remember them or re-remember them or uh I have a joke that I've written and performed and worked on for a while, but is also just an idea, a truth that I think about is that the concept of remembering like feels heavenly in a way that
Right.
to be like, oh, like whether it's actually it's sort of like the discovery process as well. Whether it's like, oh, is this new? Is this or is this something that I had forgotten? Or is this something that I had never thought? Either way, it's arising now and it feels like warm and beautiful and resonant. Is it starting or is it continuing?
Right. Well, and on the flip side, whereas remembering is gorgeous, it's also, I found, and I learned the thing with the note taking in my meditation practice, because I would be sitting there trying to watch my breath or whatever, and it would just be like, call the optometrist, call the optometrist, call the and I'd call the optometrist, and it would go away. And so, whereas like remembering is gorgeous, also sort of allowing thoughts to go away out of the mind is really, really sweet. And sort of, even when it's a thought that I want to hold on to, because sometimes there are thoughts I want to hold on to, and then, some kind of brilliant idea that's going to change the world, and then it drops away. And I'm like, wait, what the hell was that? Like, wait, where's that thought? And, I hear my teacher's voice, impermanence. You don't get to keep it just because you want it. Thoughts go away too. I was like, okay, I'll just drift into space then. They're like, now you're getting it.
Yeah, you remembered to do that. Remember to let go, especially like, I've certainly found that if I forget something that I want to remember, like trying real hard to remember it isn't the route to remembering it. Letting it go is either the route to remembering it or to feeling better about not remembering it. Um, so so self-referential art.
Yes.
I love MC Escher. I love so here's the thing. Here's an experience I had once. I was, I think, on a date, or it's a person who's a friend of mine now. We were hanging out, getting to know each other, and it was some years back. And I remember sharing with this person. We were sharing like, oh, like what comedy do you like? What music? What art? And I shared two specific comedy sets. One by my friend who's a comedian named Nick Vatterott, who is a wonderful, beautiful comedy weirdo, and another by my friend who's a comedian and an artist, and whose art is behind me right now and has adorned some of my albums and show posters and podcast artworks. I was like, his art has adorned his art. Perfect for what we're talking about. And it's Ramin Nazer. And I shared these comedy sets of these guys with my friend. And afterwards, she said to me, you know, these guys are doing comedy about comedy, like among other things. They're not just like, so what's the deal with comedy? But she's like, there's some themes that run through both of these guys where they're doing something meta, something parenthetical and self-referential, something that isn't just like straight ahead, like observational comedy, that isn't just straight ahead political comedy, that isn't just straight ahead like truth-telling, storytelling comedy. It was like some amalgam of things, but with a thread that was like a thing about the thing that it is. And because playing with the idea of like how weird it is that, stand-up comedy is like, I talk and you listen, and like it's, if you zoom out of anything, you can be like, that's weird. And so, these are guys who like zoom out and zoom in on the weirdness. And so my friend said to me, it's interesting that you love these guys because that's what you do. You love yourself. So I think that it goes back to my family loving me and encouraging me and telling me that I was the best and could do anything that I wanted to do, even if the world outside of my family was like, you need some other data points as well. Like in the Talmud, there's a thing about have one piece of paper. A rabbi was like, I have one piece of paper in one pocket that says this world was created for you, and I have another piece of pocket with a paper in it, and that piece of paper says we are nothing but ash and dust. And those are both, valuable things to understand. And the way that I like to frame it sometimes now, here's the way that I like to simplify it, but I only say this simple version after I say the longer version, so it actually makes it a longer version. But long story longer, you're everything and you're nothing, and whichever one of those resonates more with you, think about the other one for a little bit, because we are, we're what do you get when you cross an everything and a nothing? Everything, I think, and And so I think that I have been resonating with and here's the thing, it's very difficult to both analyze yourself and be yourself at the same time, but that is I'm doing my best.
Well,
uh
it's like, who are those? There's two people there.
oh
There's the
yeah.
analyzer and the analyzee.
So yeah, and I'm out to analyze the analyzer.
Well, who's that guy?
Yeah.
No, it's like it's analysts all the way down.
It's analyzery. It's analyzer palooza. uh Analyza palooza is that's really fun. I gotta write that down. But I'm not. Let's see if I remember it
I ate
later.
mushrooms there once.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. I've been saying the word. I almost said I've been playing the word beautiful a lot today. And I've been feeling it. This is you have a warm space here. Can I tell you a quick story that
Please do. Yeah, thank you. The mushrooms told me to make it that way.
that makes sense. So my friend Gus,
the acid agreed.
my friend Gus, the Buddhist, the aforementioned, told me this the other day. He found a video of mine that I made in collaboration with a musician animation friend named David Last, and David helped me make this video that was it's basically like a faux but maybe not faux meditation video, and it's also a promotional video for my new album that came out earlier this year. And it was so basically I said things like, just relax, just sit there and breathe and get ready to download my new album. A joke kind of on itself. Like perhaps you could listen to it and actually relax, but the function of it was also simultaneously to let people know about the album. And so my friend made these animations, and he made music, and it's beautiful, and I love it. And my friend Gus said I love it, and asked me about like the collaboration process between me and this guy. And I just told him, I just sent him these words, and he put them into the thing. He did all the visuals and audios other than my voice. And he was like, well, he did such a good job. He's like, you have a good way of like, you have a real talent at like meeting people or attracting people or, connecting with people who are connected to, the allness of things. I forget how he said it exactly. But, and then he said, let me clarify. And he told me a story of, he's like, when I moved to New Jersey once for a residency.
Once.
And yeah, I only moved to New Jersey once. I don't live there now. I didn't live there before, but I moved there once. And he said that a friend that lived there was like, oh, are you gonna miss your neighbors from where you're moving from? And he's like, I actually don't really know my neighbors. I was like, oh wow, you're gonna love New Jersey. You are gonna love it because everyone here like is really good friend. Like your neighbors are so friendly. You get to know your neighbors. That's what New Jersey is all about. He's like, wow, that'll be interesting, a new thing. And so then that friend helps him move in. And while they're moving everything, whenever somebody walks by, that friend is like, hey, and starts a conversation. And then and every time they start the conversation, they have a conversation, the neighbor leaves and they're like, see, everyone gets to know their neighbors here. And there's no point to like whispering to that person, I think the getting to know your neighbors is coming from inside the you. And like, that is a thing where I'm like, I've had experiences with friends that are like, I feel angry sometimes. And I'm like, but you seem so warm. Come on. And and they are warm. And it's not that anyone is only one thing, but they say we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And so it's funny. One story about Nick Vatterott, one of the comedians who I mentioned, he and I were at the Bridgetown Comedy Festival in Portland, which I love. And I saw him do a set. And the content of this particular bit was ultimately, I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but it was about how far in the future and far in the past perhaps are the same, and that the oneness of everything pre-Big Bang is the same thing at the end of the universe, that it keeps, maybe it's an infinite cycle and time doesn't exist or matter, and that like we're all one, we're all as literally one as possible, you know, before, after, and during, but we just aren't aware of it as during, but that the creation of our separate selves was perhaps so that love could be experienced subjectively from different perspectives, and not just being, but uh and I was like, wow, like, so he presented that idea. It was about like oneness and dating. And I had been working on material that is now on this new album I put out this year. This is a podcast, I know, to for its own sake, and to talk about creativity with respect to uh, psychedelics, and to let people know about the Psychedelic Summit. There's so many things happening at once. It's all one. And I went to Nick after his set,
Well,
and I
like
was like,
Bruce Springsteen said,
yeah.
but that can wait.
uh, so I said to Nick after his set, I was like, that was an amazing joke. And I just wanted to let you know, like, some of the themes in that one joke, like, are things that I've been talking about with, like, you know, I have some material on this new album that I've been working on, that are like resonant and like relevant and related to that thing. And he's like, oh no, did I do like your bit? You know, I don't want to take your bit. And I was like, Nick, it's a separate bit. And it's also really funny that you're like, oh no, is my we're all one bit too close to your we're all one bit? Like, I want to make sure that the dividing line between me and you with respect to our we're all one bits exists.
I mean, there's perhaps a sequel to The Aristocrats in there, where all of the comedians just talk about how we're all one.
I I love that a lot. And honestly, you know, I had a when I was a kid, I wore like t-shirts with like weird things on them, you know, because you're a kid, you're not even controlling your t-shirts. But like, as an
How is
adult,
it? How has
yeah.
that changed? What's on your
Uh,
T-shirt now?
uh, on my shirt right now, it's I love these Sure Design t-shirts. On it right now, there's a bunch of mushrooms. I have a bunch with trees. There's a couple with owls and pot leaves. There's ones with different animals. I have one with a turtle I've been getting into more recently, because I've been learning about turtles. Do you know that their organs don't degrade like ours do? Like 100-year-old turtle's organs are the same functioning capacity as a teenage turtle,
Well,
whether mutant ninja or otherwise.
it was perhaps because of their. Why is that? All I can think of is the alkalinity of their diets.
I don't know if it's a nature or nurture thing. My girlfriend suggested that it's their attitude. She's like, we got to think like turtles, you know, slow and steady a little more. I know that's tortoises, but they're related. So, to answer your question sincerely and specifically, what changed is I stopped wearing shirts with fun stuff on them, and just wore like plain shirts for a while, just like very solid colors, maybe a couple lines here and there. Uh, and I was like, adulthood, you know, like
Right.
sometimes girlfriends help me pick out shirts. You look good in this. And then when I found this particular company, I was like, I love what these shirts look at. Like your shirt, yeah, you can like avoid decision fatigue if you're like, you want to be like Steve Jobs or Batman, have just a closet full of the same outfit and be like, look at that. Then I have my brain power focused on other stuff, don't have to worry about what I'm going to wear. But if you also want to make your outfit like an artistic, creative decision, why not also do that? So it's like 0 or 1. Be like, oh, look at that. You don't have to worry about it. And I like replacing worry with wonder. You can wonder about it. You can wonder and create and make something. If you want to, you can make something of your outfit, or you can make something of, you know, your time, your brain, your uh, whatever you want to make stuff of.
Right. To create beauty. You know, kind of like you were saying. What was the first thing in the rabbi's pocket?
Oh, this world was created for you.
Yeah. Well, and also, I almost feel like in the other pocket, what if it was like you were created for the world?
Oh, for sure. I like that. There's two sets of two pockets. He's like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
forgot about this pocket." We're always forgetting all of our pockets,
Where
for
we're sort
sure.
of, we're dressing for the joy of the people who are looking at us.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
If,
And we can also be, oh, that is beautiful. We can be the people that are looking at us as well. So even, and I think
right.
that's like, that is a thing about art that sometimes when I'm having discussions about like what art is, like it seems to me under its optimal circumstances, there is an artist who is creating it
Mhm.
intentionally, perhaps, and there is an RT who is receiving it, perceiving it, and perhaps interpreting it, whatever it is. But that there are
This,
two.
this witness consciousness that always gets talked about. You know, there's
Yes.
like, because there's the one who's being analyzed, and then there's the analyzer, and then there's the witness who's just like, oh, look at those two at it again.
And so with music, like, I wrote a song actually last week, where the lyrics are, musicians are lucky because they can make music even if they're trapped in their home. Uh, as for comedians, we are not as lucky. For example, what am I doing right now? The answer is becoming a musician, or being a musician. I don't remember the lyrics to my song, but I'll listen back. And the thing about music is it's much easier to be the offerer and the receiver at once. Whereas with comedy, you can be as well. But in fact, in comedy, as opposed to playing an instrument, the audience is in many ways more instrumental. And the audience, in fact, is in ways the instrument.
Right, right. I mean, I can relate, being that, I play guitar, and there are times when I will be chanting or playing whatever song I'm playing. And yeah, the energy is flowing. And like I'm feeling really good. And there's almost like that Reiki quality. They say, when you do Reiki, the Reiki energy comes through you first. And there have been also times when I have been public speaking or teaching. I'll teach yoga or meditation or something. I've done stand up maybe twice, at open mic nights. But, sometimes I will just tell the story, and I know it's kind of funny, the story about Ganesh or whatever. And the yoga teachers lose it and laugh. And that feels amazing.
Yeah, and that's what a great. I didn't know that about Reiki. Of course, it makes sense, but I don't know if I'm remembering it or learning it for the first time. But what a what a beautiful analogy that is to like the way that comedy works, or the way that I like it to be, the
Mm-hmm.
way that it works for me is like, I mean, the idea has to be funny, interesting, or important to me first. It has to come
Right.
from me. And in the beginning of doing comedy, you might not know that. You might be like, whatever I can say to make the audience laugh. That's what I just like came up. That's why I wrote down so many things. Is like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know which ones are going to make people laugh. So I tried a bunch. And now, uh, thanks to psychedelics, what if that wrapped it all up? I will tell you this, that so I started doing ayahuasca ceremonies around 2014. And I remember one particular ceremony that I had where sometimes there are, like nuggets that are gleanable from it that afterwards I'm like, oh wow, I remember this philosophical idea. Sometimes there are, personal revelations, or like, oh, I like a friend of mine came out of an experience once, his first one, and he was like, my mom loves me, and it's good for me to strive to be more loving with my mom. And maybe that intellectually makes sense, but he felt that in a way that he had never felt that before.
Mm-hmm.
And and so sometimes it's a personal thing. Go on.
I was just going to say, we don't often realize how we're capable of actually consciously generating love.
Oh yeah, there's a do you know Bo Burnham?
It sounds familiar. It
Oh,
sounds like one of his sponsored videos has crossed my social.
Bo Burnham is fantastic. He is, among other things, has been a comedian, a comedy musician. Super, super. I love him, and he has a song called, I think, "From God's Perspective" or "In God's Perspective." Uh, and one part, it's part of a comedy hour that he did called "What," which I think is, I love it all. But in this particular song, there's one lyric from God's perspective where the God character says, if you want love, the love has got to come from you.
Mm,
And it's just, these are more great reminders that
yeah.
can be possible, and that the only place we can start is with ourselves. There's my girlfriend introduced me to the spiritual text A Course in Miracles, which one of the main tenets of is, I think that's a good sentence. One of the main tenets of it is like that everything in life is either an offering of love or a call for love. And so it seems to me that offerings of love are easier to spot and identify as offerings of love, but that whenever it seems that somebody is, being mean or doing harm, like in it, it doesn't mean that that's like oh, I get it. They're calling for love. Like, still help people, help,
Mhm.
end systemic abuses and personal, individual harm that's being done. Help protect people, and also we can understand that any adult who is doing harm had some experience or a series of experiences, like they were a baby at one point, and all the baby can do initially is call for love. And
Mhm.
that the baby's cry, or the heckler's cry, or the angry person's yell, like the me in traffic being like, why don't you love me, traffic, um and so, okay, do you
And
have
what
something?
gets
Yes.
interesting, what is really interesting about that as well, when we're working in the psychedelic space and we start to see that we're not an individual, we're a crowd. We've been talking about the self-referent, referencing the self, analyzing the self, and all that kind of thing, is that there are parts of us that are more capable of offering love. And there are parts of ourselves who are desperately needing that love and calling out for it. And if in one of those spaces we can put those two together, then we've got healing.
Analyze a palooza.
Hmm. Or just,
uh,
healing with Lovapalooza,
oh yes, oh yes, all the
just a
paloozas
love
are
fest.
yeah, all the paloozas are one palooza.
Hmm.
uh
Did you ever make it to a Lollapalooza?
Never.
Uh,
But I wonder, has there been a comedy version of it called Lollapalooza? uh Seems
I
like there
don't know.
would have been.
I mean, I
um
feel like that would be a great place to do the um, film release of the It's All One Aristocrats
Oh,
documentary.
of course. Now, a quick question to you. Is there a hard out time for this talk to be? Because I want to ask to try and conclude the the story that I think that I started and speaks mostly to your original question, and I can do it in a few minutes, or let me know if you want me to aim for a certain amount of time.
No, I mean we're good. We're good to go. I mean, I
Cool.
feel like um, the Skylar will let me know if we're using, if he has to go do other tech stuff.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I like thinking about everyone and their time. So thank you for that.
Well, yeah,
So,
well, you started it with the consideration, so thank you.
uh, so in 2014, I discovered ayahuasca. I'd heard about it in my 20s. I knew people who did it, and they're like, I think that the thing that so many people hear about it and they're like, nah, maybe not for me, is that there is what I now would call cleansing or purging, or cleaning, uh, and that people are like, do you vomit? And like, you might, but that's not most of it, and it might not even be any of it. But I remember, so some of the experiences are emotional, some of them are spiritual, some of them are like visual, like some of them are all combinations. Sometimes you're visiting, I've learned, like from Peruvian culture, they have, I forget the names of the three realms, but like the heavenly realm, the earthly realm, and like the realm of the dead, the underworld. And like sometimes, people are like, are there snakes? I'm like, oh yeah, like those realms are represented by like the snake, the cat, and the condor, or the condor, the cat, and the snake, depending which way you're going. And like sometimes people will see certain, imagery, certain animals, certain figures, but that the images are not the main thing. My guide says, the images are like the frame upon which the tapestry of your experience is built or found. And so one time, like maybe, I'd done it a handful of times, and I think this was in like it was either February of 2014 or 15. I forget which, depending which year it was that I started and how long into the future it was. But it was, yeah, 2014 or 2015. I had this experience where I did it 2 nights in a row. And the first night I didn't hallucinate at all. I didn't see anything. I just had this clarity, this rational almost clarity of experience. I was like, it's all like love, always forgive was like the theme that like the chorus of the song of that experience for me. Like almost to the point of, and then I would imagine people offering like, or other versions of myself offering like, but what about in this situation? No, always love, always. But what if somebody does? No, always love, always forgive. But, and it was funny to me at the time that I was like, oh, like the initials of that expression, always love, always forgive, are a laugh. And then that was legitimately the seed of that. I was like, what if the seed of the idea to make that into, could I do comedy where that is like about this idea, about this experience, and like that where it can still be comedy. Like, because here's the thing: is like, you can have a message and not do comedy. You can do comedy and not have a message. You can not have a message and not do comedy, and those are the only options. Now you can like people like, and depending what you think of, like I'm even now like in the moment disclaiming because of thinking about even the like the goal of comedy, like what comedy is a it's not any specific one thing for every person, but like you could look at Carlin and be like, that's like one of the most influential comedians there is. And if you take certain snippets, I could come up with probably certainly a whole hour of his comedy where he's not getting laughs, where he's doing more poetry, where he's simply like railing, if not simply, where he's complicatedly railing, with
Mm-hmm.
particularly chosen words. There's times that he's not getting laughs that he doesn't want to get laughs because he wants to say something. And that's like, at its best, like comedy says things, whether about society, whether about the individual, whether about whatever it is about, says things about whatever it's about, and makes people laugh. Like that it comes from the person and like is received by the all who receive it.
Well, that goes
And
all the
yeah.
way back to like the Fool in the Court, right? And it was Carlin who one of his albums was called Occupation Fool. So he's like
Yes.
very consciously referencing back to the fool in medieval times was the person who was allowed to perform social criticism and political
Yes.
critique.
Yes. And that's not the role of, I mean, that if you choose that role, then that is your role. Or if that
Mhm.
role chooses you, then that is your role. Like I've thought
But
about
Carlin
in,
definitely did it.
oh yes, 100%. I mean, and he also contained multitudes,
Yeah.
Walt Whitman style and all of us style. That like I think some of his comedy would be like, he'd come out and the first line could sometimes be pussy farts, and that is that's not speaking truth to power, but it was his introduction. Like sometimes it was just like gross funny stuff. And then sometimes it was just like observational wordplay, like evil Knievel can get on the plane, I'm getting in the plane. Uh, and then sometimes it was like the government is harming people. And I mean, I think it was even being those three different aspects of himself in the order that he chose was, an artful, curated experience.
Yes.
Um, and there are some comedy these days and all days. I've found this dichotomy useful to me that like some comedy might be more for escape and some comedy might be more for engagement. Like if there's somebody on the front lines, working in a hospital, like at a time of a pandemic, and then after a 12-hour shift goes home, they might not want to hear comedy or listen to music or art about like the hard times that they just experienced right immediately. They might want to put on a Brian Regan or you know something that helps them like just relax.
Mm-hmm.
And Ursula Le Guin, who I've been reading a lot recently, who I really love, she has a quote that I should memorize exactly, but basically it's about people who accuse like art of being escapist. She says something like, "Escape is moving towards freedom. So what's the accusation about?"
Mm-hmm.
Like But also, like, there's so many comedians like Kamau Bell and Hari Kondabolu and Maria Bamford, like, who are, you know, either talking about like both like the intersections of politics, society, social justice, like their own interactions with, you know, their own, like, with racism, with the stigma of mental health, with, you know, all these different things. Um, and
Bamford's
so, yeah.
YouTube, Bamford's early YouTube stuff, like that series she did,
Oh
blew
yeah.
me away.
Oh
That
yeah.
was like ridiculous. It was just powerful
She
and
is.
hilarious.
Oh yeah, she's the best Maria Bamford there is, and one of my favorites forever. And so when I started doing comedy, it was like I said, I didn't know how to do it. Like most of the time when you start doing something, you don't know how to do it. But I understood, like, oh, say things and try to get laughs. Uh, and I would do like my first hour of comedy, my first album. Like there were some jokes on it that were about things I cared about like vegetarianism, about like racism and homophobia and sexism. And then some jokes were about movies that I liked or movies that I didn't like, and some jokes were about my personal life. And but it was I was essentially at the time just I didn't realize how much agency that I would eventually come to know I had in deciding what jokes to continue working on. I was just like, well, these ones came to me and made the audience laugh, and I worked on them. In fact, I was like, wow, I was like my friend's neighbor in New Jersey who was like, wow, the everyone here is so neighborly. Like you're neighborly. I was like, wow, these are the jokes that made a person laugh once. So I'm gonna work hard on them because I bet I can make them. But almost now I know almost any idea that I have that I think is worthwhile, I can I can be neighborly to that joke and make that joke a neighborly joke. Like, you know, like Jesus said, love thy neighbor. And a joke I wrote recently is like, and then politicians are like, well, then how do we gerrymander the neighborhood to make it find, how do we know where we have to stop loving people? Um, but I'm like, all these jokes could be, yeah, my neighbors, my children, like, and it's just a matter of which ones I now want to and decide to spend time thinking about and spend time working on and bringing to different audiences and, you know, crafting and honing. And so in 2014, 2015, when I had that idea, that seed of an idea that I'm like, I was starting to understand that I could do comedy about anything. And I'm like, this is what I want to do comedy about now. And I had all these experiences, and that is what eventually became this hour of comedy that originally, when I was touring, it was called All Killing Aside, and is now an album called AKA, in which I talk about my experiences with ayahuasca and general themes of. It's called All Killing Aside because it's about love, compassion, and not murdering. And those are like I I now know, having done it, like I did it, and that's where it started. Like at the time, I was working on a different album that came out 3 years ago. That was about not wanting kids, and that was what I wanted to be writing about and thinking about at the time. And now I'm like, oh wow, it's like uh, Todd Glass is a comedian who says a thing that I like, and a lot of comedians say this, but he's the one who I remember. Like in today's climate, where there are people who are comedians who are like, we're under attack. You know, there's like freedom of speech violations, you know, that we have to worry about, which go back to Carlin and Lenny Bruce actually going to jail for the things that they said. Um,
I know. I
and
was really impressed to see that the marvelous Miss Maisel bailed him out.
Oh yeah.
Bailed out Lenny Bruce, a little piece of comedy history that I
it's
wasn't aware of.
oh yeah, it's nice to learn. It's nice to learn. Uh and and so here's the thing that Todd Glass said that I like, and I'm probably paraphrasing. He says like, of course you can talk about whatever you want, but what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, "Oh yeah, like I legit that ayahuasca experience was I'd say a pivotal, like,
Mhm.
I it's funny. I feel like most of the time you don't know about pivotal experiences while they're happening. And so like now I'm like, in retrospect, I'm like, that was would if I hadn't done that ceremony that night, would I have had those thoughts, that idea? Would I have, like, I mean, I eventually would start learning more about Buddhism. I would start meditating in a regular way more. I would meet the woman who has been my girlfriend for the past 4 years, and in a relationship that has been kindness inducing and meditation inspiring. And, all of like, it's like, if anyone said, like, somebody asked me recently, like, how you said that you used to be different, like I used to be let's say less focused on active kindness and mindfulness. Like, not that I was trying to be an asshole, but I probably was more of one in a lot of ways. And I mean, and my family was loving and they encouraged being loving. And also, other messages come in from different people and society. And we follow the path that we do and we come along it the best that we can. Hopefully, like, I'm now like, I hope I was being as kind as possible all the time. And also I know, if I'm not at my best, if I'm hungry or tired or focused on more fear-based thinking, then I can get into arguments with strangers on the internet. I can, but when I think about practicing things like gratitude and gratitude journaling, or starting from a place of the abundance that I have, that I specifically, and this is for myself, not prescribing for anyone else, but for myself, I'm like, I have so much. I am so lucky. I've been given so much. And what can I do? What can I do with that, for the people that I care about and for everyone, for all my New Jersey neighbors and non-New Jersey neighbors. But yeah, I do now. So if somebody asked me, like, when did that say, they asked me, when did you change? If you're like this now, you were in some ways not like this before. And I think it was, I say June 27th, 2016, which is when I met my girlfriend. That's one time that I changed forever. And
Happy anniversary.
yeah, thank you so much. And that particular February 2014 or 2015 ayahuasca ceremony, that's another time that I changed forever. And then I also just learned that there a lot of Buddhists believe that reality, every impermanent thing in every moment arises, abides, disintegrates, and arises again 360 times per moment. And some are like, it's only 60 times per moment, but many believe 360 times per moment. So every moment, I'm also infinitely changed, or 360 times changed. Though I'm probably also made of a bunch of impermanent things and not just
Yeah, I
one
mean,
impermanent thing. Yeah.
even this concept of I you keep throwing around is really just sort of a rounding up of these 360 whatevers and then some.
Oh man, I like that the one pocket paper that says this world was created for you is a rounding up, and the one that says we are nothing but ash and dust is a rounding down.
Mm, right. Well, I mean, it was like, it's a Nisargadatta Maharaj quote where he says, when I know I'm nothing, this is wisdom. And when I know I am everything, that is compassion. And between these two banks, the river of my life flows.
Oh man, that's good. That reminds me of the story that I've heard from Ram Dass of, I think, the god, I think the monkey, there's like a
Hanuman.
monk, yeah, and Ram, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And so the monkey god, Hanuman, I think, whatever it
Definitely.
is, yeah,
It's Hanuman.
Hanuman says, like, when I don't remember you, I serve you, and
Mm-hmm.
when I do remember you, I am you.
Yes.
Uh, and so, and one other, just to iterate another time that that quote unquote I was changed forever, is like my parents and my upbringing, my being raised in such a way that, like, I could even begin to be on the path that I am, that I was so encouraged, and that I'm so grateful for, like, the artistic environments, the artistic mindsets, the musical skills that were, that I didn't choose, and that were chosen for me, like by my parents first, and then they just continued to maintain, and I then was lucky enough to discover the thing that my mom wanted me to discover with music, and that's, I feel like, all laying a groundwork, like all creating a frame upon which the continued uh, exploration and creation and discovery of music and comedy and art that has become, the thankfully, like my life's like literal work, my career. And that psychedelics, I think, were just, another, like, psychedelics are like my parent or like my girlfriend or like I almost said any tool, but I mean, psychedelics are a tool, and also, and certainly the people in my life are more than tool. Guide, my girlfriend just called from the other room. Yes, these have all been valuable guides for me in helping me determine, the guidelines for how to live. And so, e- in every moment, and also in every life, we go from uh, zero-ish to everything-ish. And so these are all the things that these are a few of my favorite things.
And back again, which kind of reminds me, in your stand-up, you sort of quote Dr. Seuss a little bit.
I do. Do you remember? Can you give me? I think you mentioned that to me in an email.
Well, you were talking about On a Boat and with a Goat, which is green
Oh
eggs and ham.
yes, of course. That's really funny because my first album that I put out 10 years ago, which is called Vegan Mind Meld, has like an explicit Dr. Seuss uh, rhyme that I do. That's sort of like an extended homage to green eggs and ham.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think it also mentions all the places you'll go. And I legit forgot that the newest album also references Dr. Seuss.
Well, I have an 8-month-old. Actually, he's going to be 9 months old tomorrow, and his present, his 9-month-old birthday present, is a plushy one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish.
Love it.
And so I'm reading a lot of Dr. Seuss, and it's over and over and over and over and over again. And so I was just thinking, when you're talking about, this guide to from here to there, from there to here, from here to there, funny things are everywhere. It just sort of keeps rolling through my mind. And I can't help but notice, when you're talking about like all love, all forgiveness is kind of not traditionally a foundation for comedy.
Hmm.
When you watch a lot of comedy, it's a lot of people being mad at stuff and holding grudges, and almost sort of like building alliances with the audience to kind of hate things together and hold grudges against them.
And if I may, not only comedians and audiences, but like family members,
Sure.
and families, grow to be like, this is us, this is, it's us against the world, even though we're part of the world. And
Hmm.
then, and then sometimes it's like your city or your geographical unit, your country, for some people, your race, your religion, your ethnicity. Like, we as humans, we come up with or we create or discover or some combination there between
Hmm.
categories, and categories can be very valuable, and also they can be dividing, and the one thing that I didn't say I'm glad you brought this up is the night that I was having that always love, always forgive, mantra like pounding through my head. I The next night came back, and I had been fasting most of the weekend. Like, I had a little bit of something when I got home after the first experience, but then mostly it was 2 days of fasting. And so
Hmm.
I felt completely weak and overwhelmed emotionally during the second night's experience. And I felt myself like almost the victim of the loud, almost arrogant confidence of the me from the night before. Like I was now the person on the receiving end of that almost berating.
Hmm.
Uh, and I was like, I am in need. Like I'm in need of like care and understanding. And so, I mean,
Call
part
for
of the,
love.
yeah, part of the comedy became that it was important to like, my grandmother used to have, uh, a sign up in her, like in her entryway of her home that said, be nice or get out. And that became thematically something that I talked about in this comedy. And, you know, if I were to look at the two versions of myself from those two different nights, I would want myself to be compassionate to, with, and as myself. Uh, and so it was a valuable experience to have that, you know, the weak, more in pain, more suffering of the circumstances of my own, you know, mental and or emotional, maybe more mental than emotional. It felt like Saturday night was more mental and Sunday night was more emotional, and that those were both valuable sides of that river to explore and understand.
Very,
And
very
so,
cool.
so yeah, so the fact that I think that when what you say about comedy, I do think that most comedy is not explicitly about love. But I do think that that all comedy, I'll go out on a limb and say all comedy and all music and all art of any kind, or at least all of the best art or all of my favorite art, or so much of it. I think an argument could be made because love is the only thing that is real, and we're always either calling for it or manifesting it,
Offering it.
offering
Yeah.
it, that all comedy, all art, all music comes from the seed of love. And whether it's a lot of comedy is calling for it, perhaps in a moment, more than explicitly offering it. But it's
Right.
also calling for it, like when Carlin or Lenny Bruce or Kamau Bell or Maria Bamford, like if sometimes they're not literally saying, you know, it's important to love people, you know, they might be, you know, speaking truth to power, pointing fingers
Hmm.
at, you know, at the people, like, hey, let's not do this. Let's not do this out of love. Yeah, and the goal is to make people laugh. My girlfriend has walked by again and offers, and you know, laughing is, I think, often an external manifestation of lovingness.
Absolutely. Well, just even physiologically, there was the armoring and the fear and the pain that can get wrapped up in like the diaphragmatic muscles that get released through laughter.
Oh, great. That's good.
So, yeah, they're the same muscles that allow you to laugh and allow you to cry, right? So you give a deep emotional release there potentially.
It makes sense.
And yeah, I mean, we are often, comedians are, even in the, sometimes in the alliance building, we're often called to a greater level of consciousness, right? And consciousness and love are, as much the same thing as matter and energy. There's got to be an E equals MC squared in there somehow.
Oh yeah, I like the idea of alliance, like and ultimately, like hopefully, I think, you know, it's not where alliances perhaps get into trouble, and maybe where I'll get into trouble even talking about trouble.
When they don't
Uh,
include everybody.
and that yes, and when they become set in stone, and aren't a constant breathing, you know, like if you want to keep being alive, you have to keep taking breaths. You can't be like breathing, got it, check, done. Like
Mm-hmm.
it has to be a constant building. It can't be alliance built, because we're not done with society, we're not done with humanity. Like while we're in this and or these incarnations, like right now there is suffering, like in the Buddhist mindset, or in the from what I've learned from my friend, like the goal of enlightenment is the cessation of suffering for all. So that, and the goal of becoming enlightened is to help other people become enlightened, so that they can help other people become enlightened, to eventually get to a place where it is where suffering is eliminated.
Isn't it so remarkable that, I talk to people who have these kind of grandiose ideas about enlightenment and what it all means and, what kind of magic powers they might get with it. But when you look at, the Buddha's teachings, he's basically, suffering is caused by greed, hatred, and ignorance. Can we sort of knock that? Can we knock that off? Can we like these things create suffering? Let's just stop doing that so we suffer less.
Ram Dass has said a thing that I like about how eventually you may have the powers to move mountains, but at that point you won't want to.
Right. Well, there's this one story about the Buddha that he was kind of walking through the woods and he got to this river and there was a yogi, a sadhu with big dreadlocks on his head, meditating by the river. And he saw the Buddha and he kind of knew that he had heard of the Buddha. He knew he was special. And he wanted to kind of like show off a little bit. And he was like, hey, I can walk on this water here. I meditated and I learned how to walk on water. And the Buddha's like, that's cool. Can I see? And he, does a couple of Hail Marys or whatever. And he walks across the river and walks back. And the Buddha's like, yeah, man, that's super cool. And the yogi says, it took me 10 years to learn how to do that. And the Buddha shakes his head and he goes, bro, the ferry's only a rupee.
Haha.
It's like, what is the point if suffering hasn't ceased?
Yes, it's that's I like that story. The Buddha, he knew his stuff.
He knew his stuff.
Another thing that I thought of recently about the concept of alliance. I said this, it started as a joke and also a joke that has some, it's funny, the idea of like just joking, including lying, or like some of the greatest jokes, speaking truth to power, that when comedians are doing that, it's truth. Like, so I have a joke about jokes and truths, but I won't do that here. I will tell you that I have recently discovered the power that I have, which I call Aldar. It's like some people think
which is not a bad restaurant in Philadelphia.
Oh, how do you spell it?
Aldar.
Oh, mine is ALLDAR. So it's I can recognize people who are part of all. Mm-hmm. Like right now,
nice.
You're part of all, and it's funny that I told my friend Gus, my Buddhist friend Gus, and he was like, haha, that's funny. And then like a day later, he was like, oh, I think I understand what you meant. And I was like, oh, what did I mean? And he was like, I thought at first you just meant you could recognize anyone who's part of everything. And that was funny. And then he's like, but then I realized maybe what you meant was you could recognize people who are aware that they're part of everything.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, that's what I meant.
Well, Ram Dass talks about that too. He goes, sometimes, you're walking around and you catch a gleam. You walk around and you see everybody's all wrapped up in their crap. And then every once in a while, you like catch eyes with somebody who's home, and then they could be, it's like from Yale to jail. It doesn't matter what the external is.
So yeah, it's even to just have the concept, whether we're there all the time or as much as we can. Mm-hmm. It's nice to know that there is a home.
Yes, it is definitely nice to know. So what do you have? Do you have stuff coming up other than the summit? You want to chat about the summit or other projects or anything like that for a moment?
Sure. Thank you. The idea of things coming up is almost laughable, but here's a couple things I'll say about it. One, Maria Bamford has a joke that I love where she's like, whenever people ask me, like, what are you working on? I'm just like, I'm done. Finished early. And
one of my meditation teachers who's like real into non-dual stuff, he's like, the public works program of Paul is finished.
Mm-hmm. So here's another answer that comes from my own experience is in March, when it was March. Remember back in the past when the future started going away? And I had a bunch of gigs set up for April, May, June. I was going to be in Edinburgh for the Fringe Festival right now. And, other things potentially moving forward on the horizon. And as those gigs started to, disappear from the calendar in those months, there was one that was in April in Connecticut. And they were like, so we're not going to do it in April, obviously. And so we're talking in March. They're like, so maybe we'll move it to June or July. And I'm like, sure. Like, at the time I was like, it legitimately is like, and why don't we move it from Connecticut to Narnia? Like, it seems as fictional. Like the idea of a future month, um, like, and what could be happening. Like, I have a few, like, I have in the past few weeks performed outdoors for the first time a couple times since my last shows on a cruise ship in March. And
Oh man, we got to start a GoFundMe for the cruise ships. They've got to be hurting.
they certainly will. They're part of the All Alliance, the All Alliance. Ooh, All I.
Well, they're all inclusive, so that's nice. That's something.
It's true. Uh, oh, what about I'm all exclusive. It excludes the all. I think nothing is all exclusive. That sounds good. So what I have been doing, when I decided, and when the world and I decided that performing, traveling would be on hiatus for a little bit, I started doing a lot of shows online. Like there are some that I do regularly on, like there's some Friday night shows I do every Friday and Saturday at 10 p.m. on Instagram Live. I record a Zoom every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern. This is all Eastern. That those Zooms have become a new podcast that I started called The Faucet. That was born of my girlfriend's thinking, because I did a show for this online comedy club called the Nowhere Comedy Club, where I'll actually be doing another one, depending if you're listening to this before August 23rd. Sunday, August 23rd, I'll be doing a headlining set at the Nowhere Comedy Club with comedians Katrina Davis, who will also be at the Psychedelic Summit that we're talking about, and Laurie Kilmartin, who is another wonderful comedian. And so I did one of those on May 8th, which was my girlfriend's birthday, which was also when my new album, AKA, came out. And it was like an album release show. And I did an hour of talking of comedy that was not from any other album that I'd recorded or released. And most of it was stuff that I was just coming up with in the moment. It was just one of my favorite ways to be on stage or on Zoom these days. On stage or on web page. I just being in the moment and creating things and finding new things, which especially for a comedian, normally you have an audience that's laughing that helps let you know, oh yeah, this is the way I want to go. But now sometimes there's no audible audience or fewer audible audience members. So I'm like, oh, if the audience isn't audible, are they an audience? They're just an yence, part of the audience. And so I came up with as many things as I did, and it was so much fun. And my girlfriend Rini was like, "Why don't you you have a podcast where you talk to people and have conversations called Broccoli and Ice Cream." She didn't say that exactly to me. I say that for you. And so on that show, I talked to people about the joys of their life as represented by ice cream and the work of their life as represented by broccoli. And so one of those comes out at least every week. And Rini said to me, she's like, but also you don't need a guest to talk. You could just talk. Like on this show, I'm grateful that you, Dan, have allowed me.
Does she ever perform? Does she ever perform or come on? Because it seems like she's got a lot to say. Seems like she's sharp.
She is sharp. On the 100th episode of Broccoli and Ice Cream, instead of me choosing to have a conversation with somebody else, she more asked me questions. So we had a conversation then. She also went to school for music performance. So sometimes we make music together. And also, the faucet is me talking only while other people listen. But she is the only person who has been in the room listening every time. And sometimes, so she participates via laughter sometimes, via ideas sometimes. On the most recent one I recorded, I think she sent me a text during it that I saw come up, and so I shared her words. And there's been one so far where she came on mic and said things. So the idea is I talk, but certainly she is always welcome. Because I talk more than her, I sometimes say things that don't matter. Because she talks less than me, she often says things, she is more likely to say things that matter. When she speaks, I endeavor to listen. When I speak, I don't
She's
even
like a
endeavor.
Quaker meeting.
She is exactly like a Quaker meeting. In fact, we have a book
It
of
just paces back and forth.
yeah, we have a book of Quaker wisdom that she read and then recommended to me, and I read. So I just in the past month or two learned about the wisdom of silence, or the silence that leads to wisdom.
You guys
In
are Jay and Silent Bob.
J.K. and Silent Bob.
Right.
Yeah, so this is all to say that in the months from like March beyond and March through May, I went on a lot of podcasts. I did a lot of streams of my own and other people's to help let everyone know about the album AKA that came out in May, which I'm grateful to have recorded a year earlier when there were audiences in buildings. And so that album exists as forever as possible. The new podcast, The Faucet, exists where I talk alone with Rini. And the old and continuing podcast, Broccoli and Ice Cream, continues to exist. And so I continue to do those. And I continue to not book a ton of live outdoor things. I've done them in a park with no microphone is the only situation that I've performed so far.
Mm.
I'm scheduled to perform at a bar mitzvah in
Mazel
October.
tov.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's like in the parking lot of the synagogue with fewer people and social distance and such. And because one other thing that my girlfriend Rini's lungs are extremely precious to me, and she has asthma, so she is potentially more susceptible to lung things. And so I am more interested in not going places that aren't essential. Just and learning more as we and hopefully helping society get to a place where we know more and are able to be as healthy, safe, and secure as we can. And if in a year I look back and I'm like, oh, I guess I could have done a few more shows sooner, I'll be grateful to be able to look back and have that not even that non-regret. If I'm grateful for it, how could it be a regret? So so I would say I release jokes and ideas and things online on social media. I let people know via mailing lists and social media when I'm doing some of the things that I'm doing. Most weeks I'm performing on like some Zoom shows, some Instagram live shows, some Twitch shows, some YouTube streams, and in some ways like doing stand up like from my home has itself become like the line between podcast and stand up performance has itself become a blurred palooza. But yeah, that's those are the main things that exist. Is you can follow me online and you'll find out when more future optimism for physical things exist. That you'll get it through my pages. If you just
Right.
search for MYQ Kaplan anywhere, you'll find all of my albums.
You're like
And
the third or fourth thing that comes up, I think, if you
oh,
search MYQ Kaplan.
oh sure, yeah,
Yeah, your SEO is okay on that keyword.
it
But
is so.
I'm excited that, I mean, I'm just gonna plug our thing.
Please, I'm excited for it too.
It's gonna be you and Shane Moss and Katrina Davis, kind of rapping about psilocybin. And you're going to be joined by about 40 other luminaries in the field, people who are, authors and magicians and cacao ceremonialists and researchers and therapists and the like. And it's kind of nice, you were talking about how your album is out there for as forever as possible, and so will this be. And that people can get 10% off their ticket if they go to psilocybinsummit.com/myq.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in a day and age, in a time, in this now where, like, kind of the same way that you can say anything. So what do you want to say? Like, where do you want to say it and who do you want to say it to? So I'm grateful for this alliance, for, when people see what you do and like it and tell you, uh that's the thing, that I think it's a Maya Angelou quote, like when people tell you or show you who they are, like believe them.
Right.
uh Maybe the first time. And then I feel like, I don't know whose addition to it, if she also said this, but when people tell you who you are, don't believe them. But I'll also offer an addendum to that, that like, if you agree with them, then believe yourself. Believe yourself about who you are.
Well, it's kind of like Alice's Restaurant, I think. It's like if one person tells you, you don't have to believe them. And if two people tell you, maybe it's a conspiracy. But when you start getting like 3 or 4 people together, maybe they're onto something.
That reminds me of two things. One, a scene from Justified, the TV show that I like, and another that Rini told me in the past day when I told her about the New Jersey neighbor thing. She was like, "Oh," she was like, "I was just talking to somebody about this story of perhaps a religious person, a shaman type." Rini read it in a book recently.
Does she want to
Uh,
tell the story?
Rini, do you want to come on and tell it,
Can we
or
get a little cameo?
uh, she says no, thank you. I will share for her that, and I hope I do. I hope I do it justice and kindness. The idea is that a shaman type of a town, or a community, is approached by somebody who's thinking of moving to the town, and he says, "I'm thinking of moving here. What are the people like here?" And the shaman says, "Good question. What are the people like where you're from?" And he says, "Oh, they're no good. Like, they're all, deceitful. They're liars, beggars, thieves." And then the shaman's like, "Oh yeah, that's what people are like here too." And he's like, "Oh, thank you for letting me know. I'm not gonna move there." And he doesn't. And then somebody comes, and he's like, asks the same question. He's like, "Oh, what are people like where you're from?" And he's like, "Oh, they're great. They're kind and loving and neighborly and nurturing." He's like, "Oh, that's what people are like here. You're gonna love it." He's like, "Thank you." Uh,
Wait, I don't
and
get it.
that's one of my favorite jokes is, I don't get it. It's because, and that's the thing that so many comedians, here's the thing about why so much comedy isn't explicitly saying love, 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 is that if it's implicit, like in a roast, when a roast is about, and it's optimal, people who love, care about, and respect and know each other saying the most incongruous, horrible things because the undercurrent, the knowledge at the root is that there's love. So they don't have
Right.
to say, and often even at the end of a roast, they're like, "Okay, but I love you." You know what I mean? Like, we love each other. So the thing from Justified, that I hope I'll be justified in saying, is like the Alice's Restaurant thing. Did you ever watch Justified? The main.
I think I got through the first season. I
Oh,
got through as much
sure.
as was I could stream at once, and then I think that I couldn't deal.
It's funny to. I got through it. Well, okay. I'm glad. I'm glad you
Well,
made it. Yeah.
well, it has that one woman in it.
Marley Matlin.
Is she the older woman with red hair who's cranky and brilliant?
No,
She
no.
like,
I'm
oh,
sorry, not Marley Matlin. Another M lady. Marley Matlin is the deaf actress who I've been watching on West Wing rewatches.
she's the
It's
matriarch.
yes. There's so many M's involved. And she's also on BoJack Horseman as a joke. Uh, I'm gonna vamp while I find
We
her.
don't. No, it doesn't matter. Tell your
Oh,
story.
okay, fair
We
enough.
gotta wrap this up.
I gotcha. Well, her name's with M's, and she's a character actress on Justified. Anyway, so the Timothy Olyphant's character says, "If you meet an asshole in the morning, you met one asshole. If you meet assholes all day, you're the asshole."
Right. I like that. Yeah. That is probably a pretty good rule of thumb.
Yeah. I mean, there's some people out there might be like, statistically speaking, isn't it possible that you could meet that, like, different one assholes all day? But that's kind of an asshole way to think about it.
It is indeed. Any sort of last thoughts you want to leave people with, other than, or do you want it to be that?
Haha. I will have my last thought be
this thing that I'm about to say and already am saying, which is thank you so much for reaching out, for enjoying what I do, for wanting to share it and me, and for us getting the opportunity to learn about each other, ourselves, the world, and, create, discover, and remember these valuable, beautiful things. And I also want to end with some very funny joke, but I don't have it.
Oh man,
Yeah, I mean,
it's
you got
okay. I
you
would
got to
expect
listen to the
nothing less.
album or come to the summit if you want the punchline to this joke, which the setup of which that's the last thing I
Is
want to
just
say.
stuttering.
Yeah, the setup. I hope the setup doesn't make you upset.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in a month.
Same. Thank you so much.
All right, be well. Thank you everybody for coming. This has been Instrumental Breakthroughs. I'm your host, Daniel. And this has been our guest, Mike. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to the Patreon for Tam Integration or Deadhead Land. Also, thank you to the live stream remote guys. You guys rock. All right, be well. Much love.